So after almost 2 years, Asmiliath Adventures is coming to a somewhat early conclusion. For various reasons, the group have decided to conclude this chapter in our D&D journey so that we can move on to projects and adventures that we've been longing to pursue. This video serves as the final wrap-up of the Adventures of the Golden Hearts and is an in-universe book written by a scholar of Asmiliath. Without further ado, I will let myself and our heroes conclude this fantastic journey. The Battle for Asmiliath, recorded by Verkan Moon. Author's note: this book is the third entry in a trilogy that details the adventures and heroics of the Golden Hearts. If you have not already, please first read Unknown Heroes and Rise of the Golden Hearts before beginning this entry. Chapter 1. Beginning of the End. April 5th, 360 GE. The Siege of Bronshard, that will eventually be referred to as the Final Drop, begins on this day. Defending their city, the dwarves of the depths man their walls and shelter their citizens in the safety of their stone halls. For the vast majority of the city-dwelling dwarves of Bronshard, this would be the first time coming face to face with the enemies of their race. Drow, Duergar, and other dark creatures flood the ancient highways of their ancestors, while unnatural and twisted armies of bone march across the jagged surface of the Surbat Mountains. Realizing that this decisive battle would take place on two fronts, battle leader Rolly Halfbeard takes control of the main force defending the large doors to the surface, while the valiant warriors of the Golden Hearts direct the defense of the Pale Legion fort below. For a more detailed account of the battle itself, I would refer the reader to Blackspine's Demise by Domrador Kegsmasher. Touching upon only the necessary information, the combined forces of dwarves, men, and gnomes achieved a strong victory. Deep beneath the surface, the shadowy beast that called himself Underking Blackspine was slain by Commander Tobrin of the Pale Legion. This hefty blow turned the tide of the relentless assault, allowing the defenders to hold the line and repel the main push of the attack. As the battle below raged, the main doors to Bronshard came under siege from the undead armies of the Plague. Prying their way in and burrowing through the ceiling of the city, the dense stone of the dwarfs' defenses threatened to collapse. The height of this fear came as the mighty shard of the city was dislodged, and the prominent symbol of dwarven pride went tumbling into the depths. As the chaotic fighting was controlled in the streets, the main gate began to buckle under the endless ferocity of the undead. Their push towards destruction only being halted from an attack at the rear, coming from a detachment of Pruidian legionnaires. With both sides of the siege now repelled, the Golden Hearts guaranteeing victory below as the Empire achieved security from above, Bronshard was saved from ultimate destruction. Historians speculate that this singular moment held the most significance in the tale of the final entrance. This is where this volume gets its name from, marking the beginning of the battle for Asmiliath.
Chapter 2. The Great Summit. As stated in the previous volume, Asmiliath at this point of time found itself plagued with war and political tension. Following the demise of Duke Bron Gratur, every faction across the land was faced with isolation from its allies and fear of its neighbors. For a more detailed accounting of the fallout from his death, refer to The Olive Tree of Bron Gratur by Clifford Lance. The last death leading to the eventual culmination of the surface powers was Kenric Hunfor, the final pure-blood son from the late King of Giles, Quintus Hunfor. He is said to have fallen ill after the passing of his father, and was clinging to life in the safety of Bronshard before his body finally failed him. His body was handed over to the Pruid Empire, allowing the Empire to declare their victory in the current war for Giles' inclusion. With the current situation of the political landscape, the dwarves of Bronshard called for a meeting of the remaining kingdoms. Spearheaded by Rolly Halfbeard and directed by various members of the Golden Hearts, prominent figureheads traveled from across Asmiliath to attend the Great Summit. From Liamus Alderman Eldred Caspian, father of Decker Caspian, came to negotiate. At the time, it was unknown that the alderman only claimed to be representing Liamus as a whole. Now we know of his proper title and station as King of Liamus, though his deception was certainly a source of friction at the time. From folk, Queen Rosmalie attended the meeting herself. Knowing that her turbulent kingdom was teetering on the brink of rebellion, and hoping to secure a beneficial enough deal to placate her noble detractors, her voice and power were assisted by Valoran Athelvain, who at the time was Count of Capelmont. For the Pruid Empire, Emperor Frenzer Hadrada made the journey down to the Dwarven city, acknowledging that his dream of unifying Asmiliath under one banner could be achieved without the lengthy process of multiple wars. After the final entrance, he would go on to say, "My fathers before me scraped land into the Empire's borders inch by bloody inch. I conquered the lands of Asmiliath with a dwarf and a quill." Finally, though the kingdom of Giles lay shattered and ravaged, Sir Brandon Campbellton was hoisted into the talks by the Golden Hearts, bestowing him with the ancient crown of his ancestors and establishing him as the next in line for Giles' tattered throne. May 7th, 360 GE. The Great Summit would ultimately stretch over a 2-week period. For a more in-depth record of the talks, refer to the Great Summit by Verkan Moon. Initially, the talks threatened to shut down as Brandon Campbellton was found dead in his room. Appearing to have died through suffocation, the demise caused many different accusations to blossom. Many believed that the Empire took it upon themselves to remove the Pretender King from his tenuous grasp on Giles' throne, though they denied any involvement and theorized that the dwarves purposefully placed him in a room where they could control access to fresh air. Unable to verify the murderer, hostilities were thinly covered to continue the discourse, driven mostly by the various members of the Mountain Guard Council, which served as a neutral party, as final compromises were agreed upon. When the talks finally concluded, it appeared that the Empire ultimately got its wish. Folk swore its fealty back to the power it had seceded from many years ago. Liamus found itself under the rule of a king who had his position secured by the Empire's might. Giles gained a new governor, Alaris Rutter, marking the end of the noble line that had led Giles for centuries. As all the pieces fell into place, Asmiliath found itself under the Empire's banner by the start of summer. In hindsight, this collection of focus and end to hostilities served as an essential weapon in the fight to come.
Chapter 3 Mingram and the Divines. May 25th, 360 GE. The Golden Hearts marched back into the Dwarven highways with a host of determined warriors at their backs. Knowing that they must break the siege at Beg Mulder, eliminate the remnants of the Mingram army, and ultimately take back the Dwarven city that had fallen to darkness, the Golden Hearts point their direction north and stride towards their enemies. Engaging in small skirmishes as they travel deeper and deeper into the highways, the various benefactors of our heroes begin to make their purpose clear. Learning from both the divines and the scholars at Bronshard, the Golden Hearts are made aware that they must acquire gems of patronage to construct the Amulet of the Five. This quickly became the sole focus of the group as each member reached out to their powerful allies. Valoran Athelvain acquired a sapphire from Arovica, symbolizing her blessing and establishing the young lord as her champion. Decker Caspian was gifted a chunk of graphite from the power of Ramuts, leaving a trail of dust and shadow wherever it lay. Thorasius Fireheart called upon his connection with Ophilus, and was granted a parting gift from the dispenser of guidance, an opal gem that appeared to reflect a vast spectrum of colors. As far as historians are aware, this is the last interaction with Ophilus. Most speculate that the gift caused his destruction. Clake Deeploam III relies on his recent connection with a messenger called Carlel, stating that he had first discovered this being after he had been mortally wounded in the battle for Corn Tombsheal. From this powerful connection, Clake was gifted 2 Moonstone gems. June 12th, 360 GE. Golden Hearts arrive at the bridge spanning Svenlock Lake, finding it in disrepair and cast in darkness. Having only half the men they set off with, as Commander Tombrin takes a sizable force to rescue Beg Mulder, the party is faced with the daunting task of doing battle with the ancient creature of the lake. At first, our heroes push back seemingly prodding attacks from the giant worm, driving him again and again back into the dark depths of his home as slow progress is made across the lengthy bridge. Multiple days pass as men are lost, injuries are sustained, and progress is slow, until finally the daunting monster decides its fate. First clashing with the Golden Hearts on the bridge itself, our heroes quickly find themselves tumbling downwards as the entire structure fails beneath its weight, scattering the black waters below with small collections of dwarven stone that become the background for a vicious battle. Several deadly minutes pass as pain is inflicted on both sides, until finally our heroes find themselves triumphant over a being that appeared to be as old as Asmiliath itself. With the path now clear to Mingram, and the vast majority of the army of the depths defeated and routed, the Golden Hearts collected themselves and prepared for the final eviction of the vile trespassers they fought so fiercely against. June 15th, 360 GE. Retaking Mingram was a more practice in patience than a deadly encounter. Clusters of the remaining forces tucked themselves into every crack, nook, and cranny of the ruined city, lashing out at the party in detrimental and swift maneuvers, halting progress toward the Golden Halls until each collection of enemies could be snuffed out. For a more in-depth accounting of the cleansing, refer to Squishing Heartless Bastards by Balgrim Grimhide. Finally, as the last of the enemies were dispatched, the Golden Halls were located by Rolly Halfbeard. Opening the sealed doors with the Mother's Hammer, the determined divine warrior stepped into his fate and found himself working over the ancient forge. It is worth mentioning that during this time, Valor and Athelvain met Irenu Sisray, who would come to be known as Empress Ireno Athelvain. At their first meeting, Irenu Sisray was a devout worshipper of the false gods from beneath the world. Fearing she would be sacrificed by her people for her failure to read the omens of their defeat, she surrendered to the Golden Hearts and began her life anew. For a more detailed accounting of her journey, refer to The Grey Empress by Empress Irenu Athelvain.
Chapter 4 Chaos Before the Storm. June 20th, 360 GE. Departing Mingram with a freshly forged Amulet of the Five, the Golden Hearts traverse the new pathway to the northern expanse of the Empire, created by the dragonkind sorcerer Choramon. Returning back to the surface, the party set their path toward the Empire's capital, Central City. Now, this city is known as Jericho after the final entrance. June 27th, 360 GE. Arriving at the capital, the Golden Hearts accept their invitation to meet with Emperor Frenzer. Having informed him of the approaching doom at the Great Summit, both parties come to the meeting with new information and resources. Disclosing the new tool they had forged in the mountains and revealing all the information they had acquired through their divine connections, the Golden Hearts make it abundantly clear that the fight ahead was the only fight that mattered. Matching their information with action, the Emperor informs the party that the warriors of the realm had been called to Graves Lake, streams of men from across Asmiliath flocking to a quickly growing camp of human defiance. On top of the Empire forces, warriors and machines from the dwarven cities added their might. This stretch of time would come to be known as the culmination, with many different accounts from various sources being recorded. An account worth highlighting is Hearts of Men and Goliaths by Captain Gregory Oldrill. August 3rd, 360 GE. Spending the majority of their time scouring the Lakeview Mountains in hopes of finding Tordan's hidden lair, the Golden Hearts grow more and more restless as days pass by. In all their information gathering and the resources at their disposal, they had never been given an expected date in which Tordan would make his return. This caused their searches to last longer and stretch farther as summer slipped away and autumn began to settle in the north. Concern began to mount in the camp beside the lake as southern men were faced with their first northern chill. Talks of abandoning the campaign and returning home began to grow more and more frequent as a harsh divide amongst the various cultures of men grew prominent. All this tension ultimately came to a head on the 3rd as the Golden Hearts returned back to the camp without success. Being met with a string of detractors and growing disbelief in their words, the beginnings of a dissolution took place before our heroes stepped in. Relying on the kinship of their countrymen and the influence they had secured over their travels, the Golden Hearts rally the failing wills of the men and hold the loose collection of warriors together for the foreseeable future. In the years following, an immense amount of speculation has centered around this moment in our history, books being written on the alternate timeline that might have taken place if the strength of men had failed that day.
Chapter 5, The Final Entrance. August 27th, 360 GE. A date that will forever be carved into the minds and souls of the beings that witnessed the final entrance. There are many more indulgent accounts of this day's events, but this record will focus mostly on the actions and decisions centering around the Golden Hearts. With the mysterious warning of a growing storm gathering at the center of the lake, the gathered forces and the Golden Hearts looked on in a mixture of relief and horror. Finally, the foe that they had been preparing for all this time was making his entrance, but an uneasy uncertainty plagued onlookers as the dark clouds grew thicker and darker. A wicked and terrifying cyclone covered the lands surrounding the lake, casting the scenery into an unnatural darkness that caused most men to believe they had gone blind with fear. Through the intense torrent of rain and thunder, the figure of Tordan finally broke from the surface of the water, rising from the murky depths as a disjointed and grotesque monster. Seemingly missing the pieces of his physical form that the Golden Hearts had hidden away, Tordan was left to construct his figure with the parts he had left. From his enormous head, a collection of ill-fitted and misplaced limbs protruded towards the ground. His entire frame stretched up into the dark clouds above and draped in crude black chains that dragged across the void of water below. Blasts rang out from the machines of war that had been prepared, matching the violent symphony of the heavy storm that rose from Tordan's presence. As the Golden Hearts are attempting to formulate a plan, the final entrance finally begins. All at once, the vast storm vanishes. In its place is a large, expansive stretch of another plane. Staring up into the sky, the onlookers get their first glimpse into what we understand as the Void Realm. This scene might be described as terrifyingly beautiful, but quickly, any thought of awe was dashed as a rushing wave of spirits descended from the sky. Watching in horror, the men of Asmiliath witness the forgotten warriors of the great entrance being possessed by these undead puppeteers, raising an army of long-forgotten heroes to face off against the might that Asmiliath can muster. From here, the accounts get increasingly unreliable, and other aspects of this event are kept from records by request. But a scene that will never fade from memory is the clashing of the armies of the dead against the army of the living. At the center of this climactic clash stood the Golden Hearts. Valoran Athelvain, Thorasius Fireheart, Decker Caspian, Clake Deeploam III, and Roly Halfbeard drove a straight and determined line through the enemy to plant themselves at the feet of the Dark Prince. From the various versions of the men who fought that day, many claim that the fight between Tordan and the Golden Hearts resembled a battle between gods. Valoran diving and striking from the back of his Gryphon, Decker fading into the darkness and storm before reappearing out of thin air, Thor climbing the large body of Tordan, and Clake calling upon the stars in a vibrant display of streaking light and radiant eruptions. Whatever the particulars, the ending does not change. As one final clap of thunder shakes the earth and dispels the rip in reality, every skeletal creature collapses where it stands, as a field of bloody warriors are left looking on in disbelief at the scene in the center of the lake. A bright, perfectly straight beam of light streaks into the sky, separating the clouds above and beginning to remove the veil that we had lived under in our entire lives. Though nobody knew what our future held that day, the pure wave of victory and pride washed out any fear, left the army of Asmiliath in a stunned silence.
Chapter 6, A Larger World. It is now 8 years into CA, the completed age. Asmiliath has been exposed to a world that has been awaiting our arrival for longer than our recorded history. Though many books and explanations could be written about simply the arrival of Asmiliath into Torlara, That is not the focus of this entry. Instead, I aim to make a complete record of the heroes that brought us into this new age, the Golden Hearts.
Following the victory over Tordan and the revelation of a wider world, Valor Athelvain uses the temporary unity of the human race and his prominent position in it to take control of the Pruitt Empire. Managing a bloodless takeover, the previous emperor was persuaded to fulfill the role of the human representative in the council at Central City, not Jericho. Casting aside the outdated Pruittian prefix, the Pruitt Empire is reformed into the Asmiliath Empire. Along with this come a handful of declared laws across the entire continent, the most impactful being the denouncement of slavery and the systematic freeing of the half-orc class in Folk Kingdom. After securing the new leadership and locking in the local rulers of the kingdoms within the empire, Valor announces that he is to set off with his trusted partner Thracius Fireheart to explore and learn about this new world. While he is gone, King Eldred Caspian will rule as a steward in his stead. To this day, Emperor Valoran finds himself far away from Asmiliath's shores. He has returned back to the Empire a handful of times over the years, bringing back physical treasure and new knowledge. Many have begun to speculate that the Emperor does not appear to age, feigning the look of a young man even though he's now well into his 30s.
Thracius Fireheart. Achieving victory against the Dark Prince, Thor guarantees a timeless position for both his Goliath clan and the Oldril name. Directly after the final entrance, Thor retrieves the non-warrior half of the Rockhammer clan and convinces them to seek out adventure and a better life with him and Valoran as they set off to explore. In the years following the final entrance, Thor has traversed much of the new lands revealed to Asmiliath. Stopping first at his birthplace of the Draconic races, he is exposed to a land abundant with dragons and ancient magic. Returning back to the Empire for the first time, he was insistent on showing me his newly acquired pet, a baby wyvern. Though I tried desperately to explain to him that he would be long dead before it matured, he didn't seem dissuaded. The last reports placed Thor and Valoran sailing towards the shattered lands of the dwarven birthplace.
Commander Clake Deeploam III. Having rallied the Shevlin's chosen during the fight against Tordan, Clake establishes his unwavering loyalty and determination toward the Order's mission. Once the fallout of the final entrance is dealt with and the political shift is settled, Clake directs his entire focus towards rebuilding and honing the Order he had watched dull over the years. Now simply referred to as the Chosen, this renewed order has been built to stretch out beyond the reaches of Asmiliath as a worldwide faction against darkness and destruction. Though there is no longer a singular leader of the entire order, their main branch still remains in Willenpillow Castle, and Clake focuses much of his time in securing agreements from other nations to allow a chosen embassy to settle there. Following his heroics in the Battle of the Final Entrance, Clake has been known to converse with a few of the lingering messengers that persist after the Earth Father's departure. This insight has given him a strong hand in the old religions of Asmiliath, allowing him to clarify various practices and explain gaps in their beliefs. At the time of writing this, he still takes up residence in Willenpillow Castle. Occasionally, I will run into him at the Jericho University Library, where he explains his current problem in detail.
Prince, Decker Caspian. Following the final entrance, Decker disappeared from the public eye for some time, staying around long enough to witness his father become steward of the Empire before his whereabouts became unknown. Almost an entire year passes without recorded sightings of the Golden Heart, but when he does reappear in his home city of Uken, it is with his new wife, Genevieve Athelvain. Marrying the sister of his companion, Valoran Athelvain, Decker oversees the transition of Liamus into a feudal state as his father serves as a steward. Though exact details around these events remain murky, it is also said that his twin sister Danica plays a prominent role at his side. Currently, with Liamus mostly settled after the shift, Decker Caspian has been honored with the title of Spymaster of the Empire. Being bestowed this new position on one of the Emperor Valoran's returns, though most assume he had functioned long in this role before then. Details regarding his activities are understandably hard to come by, but it appears that he is next in line to become king of Liamus and steward of the empire. Either way, the Caspian name is permanently secured to prominence through his position and marriage.
The final page of this book appears to be handwritten. Dear Jorna, I hope you received the last volume I sent you, especially since that is the book that contains the final accounts of your father's sacrifice. Though I did not know your father for long, his vibrant and striking personality has rested in my mind. Even now, as I dig through records and hunt down the multitude of people he interacted with, I find myself growing more and more endeared to the man we have lost. Even with this trilogy finally finished and the story put to rest, I don't want you to forget the essential role your father played in this story that will last through the ages. If he were here with us now, I'm sure he would be attempting to figure out some poor rhyme to a string of lyrics and plucking away at the fringe of our hearing. As the famous poet once said, "People cannot deny, golden hearts saved our lives." Furcan Moon, October 2nd,